Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Professor and CEO. Today we're talking about protecting and promoting mental health in a crisis. I'm Ben Gillam, the CEO of ThirdWay, and just a reminder of why we're doing these videos, these webinars, is that Rachel and I have been speaking for some time about business and the academic world, and how there's so much great advice from previous crises that you can take on board as a business to help from strategy and help protect your people. And it would be so just great to really share those ideas. So that's an intro from me. And Rachel?
Hi everyone, my name is Rachel Doern and I'm a senior lecturer in entrepreneurship. And my research relates to entrepreneurship in times of crisis with a focus on crisis management and resilience. And as you know, today we're talking about protecting and promoting mental health during a crisis. And if you have any comments or any questions throughout the session, if you want to share your own experiences, you can include those in the chat function and we'll get to those a little bit later. So just to say a few words about mental health. So according to the WHO, mental health is an integral part of our health, and it's much more than the absence of mental disorders. And it tends to be determined by a range of factors, from socioeconomic factors to biological to environmental factors. And mental health problems can influence our daily functioning and our quality of life. And mental health problems can include affective, anxiety, and personality disorders, or less severe feelings of distress, so feeling flat, feeling tense. And well-being, on the other hand, is characterized by positive psychological and physical functioning and high levels of life satisfaction. So in looking at meta-analyses, and when I say meta-analysis, I'm talking about a study that pulls together many other studies, empirical studies on a particular topic, and tries to ascertain trends relating to that topic. So in looking at meta-analyses on mental health in the workplace, these meta-analyses have shown that mental health, or poor mental health, declining mental health, is linked to job strain, is linked to low decision-making latitude, is linked to high efforts but low rewards, is also linked to job insecurity, and also workplace incivility. So workplace incivility tends to deal with issues relating to rudeness at work, harassment, bullying, and so on. So all of these things in turn can lead to psychological distress, to depression, and in some cases to burnout. But also for the organization, it can lead to high levels of employee absenteeism. It can lead to low levels of productivity. It can lead to low levels of employee commitment, and also to job satisfaction. So mental health at work affects not only individuals, but it also affects the organization as a whole. So that's why all individuals within an organization, especially business leaders, should be concerned with such. So Ben.
I'd like to think quite prominently. The industry that we're in is, the way I often describe it to staff, is like what we do is it's incredibly intense. It's not necessarily rocket science. We don't have a team full of data scientists who sort of get to crunch data and write algorithms. It's intense. There's always a program to hit. There's always a budget to hit. There's always a client to look after. There's always a pitch. There's always a new project. You have sort of very few moments of to pause, to reflect, or to have some downtime. And because of that intensity, often, I found, having done most of the roles in the business in the past, that all of the things you just talked about come into play, that all of a sudden your efficiency drops, your motivation drops, and you can end up beating yourself up about that. So being aware of it myself, we made sure that we had an environment where mental health issues were never taboo. There was always someone to talk to. We've got a people team who are always there for that chat, for that moment of check-in. We've got a range of coaches for people to sort of work with and work through. We've got some people seeing other types of professional, but also just other things which were about making sure that there was community. So we'd have areas where we'd encourage people to spend time together, to have lunch with each other. We'd provide lunch, we'd provide breakfast to encourage that. And then we'd have things like yoga and other activities to actually just try and get people away from the work they were doing, to de-stress and actually decompress. So I like to think quite prominently. We're certainly very aware of it, still are.
Okay, thank you. Also, sort of looking a little bit more closely at the recent pandemic, the COVID-19 crisis and mental health. I came across a very recent also systematic review of the literature, which looks at the causes of poor mental health over the crisis and some of the stressors relating to such. And so a systematic review tends to also look at other studies, but to pull together themes relating to a topic and tries to summarize such. So in relation to those stressors around COVID-19 that can have a negative effect on mental health, this particular systematic review uncovered things like perceptions of safety, perceptions of threat and risks around contagion. So the fact that we're all fearful of getting coronavirus, or we're fearful for our families or our friends or our coworkers, that this in and of itself, these fears can lead to a decline in our mental health. Also, information overload or misinformation is another thing that came out in this study, that intense media coverage around the virus, how it spread, and the potential outcomes of such can exacerbate perceptions of danger, which can in turn have a negative impact on our mental health, or is being shown to do so. Quarantining, so going into quarantine, self-isolation, individuals quarantine have been shown to experience levels of boredom, anger, loneliness, financial losses. There can be long-term effects as well for those individuals that have been quarantined, but also for the healthcare workers that are administering the quarantines, for the public and health officials, the politicians who are mandating such, they can too experience a decline in their mental health as a result. And then there's also a stigma and social exclusion attached to people who are in quarantine, who are self-isolating. Also, there's a stigma attached to people who have had the virus, who are recovering from the virus, to people who are related to those who are recovering from the virus, and especially again to healthcare workers who are dealing with people who have the virus. So they are feeling more so than others that they are being excluded as a result, again due to fears around people catching the virus. So I think these are all stressors to be aware of. Another thing is financial losses and job insecurities. These are also stressors relating to poor mental health in the current crisis. So we know businesses have had to shut down. We know businesses aren't operating at full capacity. And this in turn leads to widespread job insecurity, to redundancies, and to unemployment. And one study has shown that individuals who stopped working over the COVID-19 crisis actually reported worse health and distress as a result. And also in looking at meta-analyses on unemployment more generally, so not specifically in relation to a crisis or the coronavirus particularly, the meta-analyses on unemployment have shown that unemployed people show higher levels of distress than employed people in relation to anxiety, depression, and low self-esteem. And research has further shown that men and blue-collar workers, as opposed to women and white-collar workers, when they're made unemployed, that they tend to experience higher levels of distress. And it's also the case that people in certain countries, so countries with lower levels of economic development and lower levels of unemployment protection, that those individuals too experience higher levels of distress around being unemployed. And in general, the outcomes relating to poor mental health in a crisis have been shown to include psychological distress and also major depression. So in the former case, psychological distress refers to a state of emotional suffering. So this means the state can be transient. So a state of emotional suffering that's accompanied by symptoms of depression. So that could be a loss of interest in things or sadness, but also other things like anxiety and associated restlessness and insomnia. Whereas depression is a psychiatric mood disorder that's characterized by more persistent reduced mood and interest and persistent feelings of sadness and difficulties coping with everyday responsibilities. And some researchers have also suggested that if psychological distress in the former case is not identified early on, that it can lead in some cases to major depression. So Ben, how have you or how might you address some of the issues I've mentioned in relation to people feeling isolated, in relation to people feeling detached and lonely, in relation to job insecurity among staff? So how might
you? I think what mainly from like direction from you, Rachel, being honest right at the beginning of making me aware of some of the things that could happen in crisis. And if you think of what you just said, our default position early on was everyone in the business is going to have some kind of mental health issue in this crisis. That was the default position, because all the scenarios that you mentioned, like that, you have to assume the vast majority of people are going to go through it. So the people team, Hannah and Michelle, who I'm going to give a nice shout out to now, were just very aware of that from the beginning. And so part of the strategy was, how can we give people the forum to know, even in this lockdown period, isolated period of uncertainty, that there's someone they can turn to. And I think where businesses perhaps fall over in this area is you become nervous that you can't solve the problem. But that's kind of okay. You know, we're not mental health professionals. Like, we can't solve the problem.
That's right.
But we can create the forum for identifying the problem and talking about the problem. And then we have to then find the balance of how we support that individual, but make sure the tasks and the operations of the business are still carried out. And don't be wrong, that's incredibly hard. It's complex, it's tough, particularly at a time where you don't want to over speculate on resource because of the market that you're in. And there's no magic answer, but the worst thing you can do is hide from it, or hide from the reality that it's going on. And I think this just ties in really well with what we talked about in the last topic about empathy. It's taking a leadership position that you're understanding that whatever decision you're making about the individual, feedback you're giving them and how you give it to them is in the context that they could be going through high anxiety, depression, stress, worry at this period of time, and making sure those messages land well and they're well considered. So that would be my advice to any business leader right now. It's default position, assume that people are struggling, and make sure there's a forum for discussing it, and make sure that you're factoring into your decision making and communication plan.
Thank you. And I also wanted to say a few words about mental health as it relates to entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship. So historically, this is not something that the academics, that researchers in general have looked at, but more recently there are increasingly a number of studies on this particular topic. And there is some evidence to suggest that individuals who choose to become entrepreneurs, and when I say choose to become entrepreneurs, they go into entrepreneurship, they start up their own businesses because they've identified a business opportunity or because they've decided to turn a hobby into a business, as opposed to people who have fallen into entrepreneurship. So they do so out of necessity, that those who choose to become entrepreneurs, there is some evidence, as I suggested, to suggest that they report higher levels of job satisfaction and life satisfaction. However, the interesting point here is that on the flip side, that entrepreneurs, because they are always on, because they are always working, also tend to fall short on other factors like positive and protective coping mechanisms, such as sleeping well, such as self-care, such as other positive strategies like exercise, finding sources of entertainment and fun, and spending time with friends and family. So these individuals might be more likely than others to ignore their needs and signals of deteriorating mental health. And Ben is nodding there, and we'll come back to you in a moment. And in a recent systematic review of the literature on entrepreneurship and mental health, it's been found that entrepreneurs are one of the groups to suffer most from an environmental shock, from a crisis. And to illustrate, looking at a very recent study on small businesses in the UK, and how small business owners, how entrepreneurs have fared over this period of time, that people are reporting low levels of life satisfaction and very high levels of stress, and that female entrepreneurs, even more so than their male counterparts, are reporting high levels of stress, which may also have to do, the researchers suggest, to the fact that their businesses may be more adversely affected over the crisis, possibly to do with the kind of business or the sector that they're in, but also it might have to do with, and there's evidence in other studies to suggest more recently as well, and it has to do with more increased childcare responsibilities. But as an aside, I also came across a study that suggested that starting a business in the aftermath of a crisis is also a coping strategy for some in terms of how people deal with a crisis. And it might also be one of the reasons why I'm noticing in some of the research I'm doing now that business owners are not only pivoting to react to the crisis, but they're creating new products and services and looking for opportunities, those who can, because it's also a coping strategy. So Ben, turning now to you, and in relation to some of the things I've mentioned, but more generally, what has the crisis been like for you personally? How have you managed work and home life boundaries? Have you protected your mental health over this period of time? So a number of questions.
How long have we got?
Yeah, we've got lots of time. So.
It's been very, like I'm sure for most people, it's been very, very tough. And I guess my starting position is I have a coach. And someone once said to me, you'll never find a high performing professional in any field of life who doesn't have a world-class coach. And it was a great piece of advice. It was like, yeah, you're right. Like an Olympic athlete doesn't just arrive. They have a coach, they have a nutritionist, they have all these people around them helping them perform at a high level. And
True.
So I've got a great coach who I can turn to. And often I can find that just having that call gives me a burst of energy and sort of gets me through a bit of a fog. Rachel, you've been a great coach for me as well during this time. And talking to you, it's like really helped me get a lot of clarity about things and be able to sort of get out of my own small world and look at the bigger picture and sort of see what else is going on. So talking to people, but then it is also about recognizing, as you say, triggers, recognizing when you are not yourself. And what I found previously when my mental health hasn't been at its best is you start to have a fall and you normalize that fall. And that's what I've come to realize is that actually, if I'm having a fall that isn't in line with how I usually think and feel and act and behave, I shouldn't normalize that. I should look at it and tackle it. So, to highlight a couple of examples during this crisis. One was very much like we drew good lines at home. To be fair, we were very fortunate. Sort of, I went to work at the same time, turned a room into an office, and was in there 12 hours a day. But very quickly, I realised that I wasn't wanting to leave that room. It was almost becoming institutionalised, the box I'd created for myself, and just very quickly almost was questioning: do I want to go back and work in an office? Like, do I want to sort of be around people again, which are very unusual thoughts. So just recognizing that trigger just helped me restructure my day. So I made sure I wasn't on Zoom all day. Sometimes I was calling in and I'd go for a walk and I'd spend an hour and a half walking, whether I was on the call or not, just to get out, just to see the world, and just have a bit of a mental reset. So that was certainly one. Another one was that I became suspicious. Like I never had that sort of feeling in my life before. And I guess you've got a lot of big things going on and you're communicating over a virtual platform where normal body language and tone isn't picked up. And I'm also worried like everyone's going to become a narcissist because of Zoom. Like I never have another conversation where I look at myself, but when I'm on like any kind of Zoom platform, just, you see yourself all the time. And I just knew that wasn't me. And I had to break that. So again, I spoke to my coach, we just sort of talked it through. And very quickly I was able to like dismiss that emotion, see the root of it and move on from it. And there's been others. There's been times where I've not felt I could process thought. Like things were going through my head at 1,000 miles an hour and just realizing I need a break. I need to sort of like go and look after myself. And one of the things I have found in life as well, in business is, if I'm not looking after my mental health, my physical health deteriorates quite quickly as well.
Absolutely.
And again, as soon as I sort of start picking up colds and sore throats and excessive tiredness, actually, often it's because I've not looked after my thought process and rest and time and decompression time that's leading to that. So sorry, it's a lot in response, but there's been a lot of things, and I'd say to anyone, if they recognise anything that I've said, like in themselves, like do go and speak to people. Go and speak to people. And last thing I'll say in terms of speaking to people is this I only really picked up on this recently. As a business owner, you have so many what you deem as important things going on in your head. And they are important. You're thinking about staff, resources, cash flow, the economy, your clients, like the list goes on and on and on and on. And you have people needs as well. Like people coming to you with very reasonable requests or sometimes unreasonable requests, but the thought process is reasonable in that they're anxious or they're going through a mental health crisis and they need to speak to someone. And I realized that what I was doing, I was starting to shut down from friends and family. I was starting to shut down and take the view, I actually don't want to see anyone because I don't want to talk about anything. Where actually what I needed to do, and I still need to work on this at the moment, is say, no, I need that. I just need to set the boundary for what I want to talk about or what I need. And I think sometimes as a business owner, you're not demanding enough of like conversations or saying that I need this conversation right now. I need this break right now, and trusting your loved ones to support you in that. So that's just another thing I'm working through myself at the moment.
So these are continual, these are ongoing strategies for you.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, because it's intense, as you say. You're never off, and if you're never off, if it's I suppose it's like a car, isn't it? If the car is driving 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, it's more likely that something's going to go wrong. If the laptop's running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, it's more likely that the processor's going to fall over. Like I think entrepreneurs are the same. You've got to realize if you're on all the time, you're going to fall over.
Absolutely. Okay, so building on what Ben has just mentioned, what can organizations do? What can other business leaders, what can entrepreneurs, CEOs, line managers do in a crisis to protect and promote mental health? So there's a lot of incredible guidance online and via research papers and otherwise, and through Mind, the mental health charity. I think that's a really valuable resource that people can look at. So, for instance, organizations should be communicating to all managers, in particular, their roles and responsibilities around supporting staff, especially during a crisis. Another thing that organizations can do is they can nominate a mental health champion or champions at work. So these are individuals who create awareness at work around mental health, who are knowledgeable about changing regulations and guidelines as it relates to mental health, and also provide peer support to their colleagues. Another thing organizations can do is to provide mental health support more generally. So they can create reasonable adjustments for staff members due to their situation at home, due to certain vulnerabilities, to create more flexible working practices. And we've spoken about that in the past. And I think organizations can also create more awareness generally around mental health, to say that not only is it acceptable here to talk about mental health, but it's desirable, it's preferred, and not to shy away from that. And I think also, and as Ben alluded to, organizations can create awareness around the signs of poor or declining mental health. So for instance, and again, turning to Mind, the mental health charity, and the CIPD in the UK, organizations should be looking at behaviors like working long hours, not taking breaks when people are doing that. They should be looking at increased levels of employee absenteeism and lateness, uncharacteristic performance issues, mood changes when people are distracted, indecisive or confused, withdrawal, anger, irritability, aggression, overreaction to certain problems or issues, and also disruptive or antisocial behavior. So Ben.
I think speaking about others is when people's communication, their general communication, starts to become emotional. That's sort of what I've recognized as a trigger. That what I've often found is that when one has an issue that is causing them some level of distress, whether that's financial, emotional, job security issues, often that's not the first issue that somebody raises. They raise an issue about something that might just be sort of an operational issue or just something to do with the job or the process of the project, but there's an over emotive response or reaction to what might be a very minor issue. And that is, for me, is the trigger that there's sort of, that's the fruit of the issue, but the root of the issue is actually deeper. And that's what we try and sort of do, is recognize that and very quickly sort of alert that to our people team. So that would be a trigger I would say to people to look out for, particularly in people where that kind of emotional reaction isn't typical. I think for myself personally, it's when entrepreneurs need to sort of like know themselves. They need to know sort of their strengths and their weaknesses. And I feel one of my strengths is that I can process quite a lot of information very quickly and know where we should direct the team or the company. So for me, whenever I feel like I'm not processing a piece of information well, it's usually a sign for me that mentally I'm a bit exhausted and I need to go and take a break. Often much to the frustration of my management team, like, can you just like make a decision? Like, actually, it's better if I take a break, wait a day, and make a good decision as opposed to rush to one. So that's sort of a personal piece.
Do you think that this new environment, so working in a hybrid fashion as your organization is doing, so some remote work, some in-person work, that it's compounding those issues?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think my fear for remote working is that the good that we all discovered in March and April will be lost by some of the horrors that we start to discover now. And actually the real exercise for a business like ours that specializes in the workplace, but I think for any organization, is to actually not overly focus upon the struggles of efficiency, productivity, mental health now, but like take a holistic approach to what was the good, what did we find, how can we hold on to it and implement that in our workplace strategy, what was the bad, what do we need to worry about, what do we need to protect against. And I was with a good friend this week who's a partner in a very big law firm in the city, and they're an incredibly professional operation. And what he had started to notice with his team was that just like personal standards, just in terms of like being ready for work, had dropped off. What he had found was all of a sudden there was like an over reflection or over focus on people's contract and their contractual hours. There was like, all of a sudden the culture of people turning off their camera on Zoom and sort of being present but not really present. And that had sort of just slowly crept in over a period of months, and they were now saying we need to tackle this. I think like all of those things, again, they're indicators that it's not normal business behavior, it's not normal professional behavior. So how do we sort of focus on supporting people through that, being empathetic to it, but also getting the outcome for them and the business that we need?
Okay, thank you. So other things that organizations can do in terms of protecting and promoting mental health include checking in regularly with team members. And this is something we've discussed quite a lot in the past. I don't think inundating people with meetings is necessarily very helpful, especially for those working remotely, but regular check-in points, whether they be one-to-one or in a group capacity, and whether they be in a professional capacity or in a social setting, because I think a lot of people who due to the virus are working face-to-face, or especially those working remotely, are sort of missing out on some of those, coffee, chats over coffee and over lunch. And can that be replicated in an online environment? I don't know, but that is something organizations can look at. Again, Mind the Mental Health charity recommends that encouraging team members to do wellness action plans can actually be quite useful. And they have a number of templates on their website, which I would encourage people to look at. And they have these different kinds of templates for different positions within the organization. So these templates might ask individuals what their triggers are in relation to the current, the new working environment, what helps them stay mentally healthy, what the signs of deteriorating mental health are for them, and what support they can put into place at home and at work to protect their mental health. Also, another thing I came across is putting staff in touch with volunteering or community support schemes. So there is a lot of evidence to suggest that when people are focused outward, that it can also improve their mental health, that it can also be used as a positive coping strategy. And as I've mentioned many times before, once again, prioritizing self-care is really important for everyone within your organization. And I mean you, Ben, so people at the top all the way throughout. So I can't stress enough the importance of taking a break on the weekend or a holiday, but also setting boundaries between your work and your home life, switching off when you can, especially for those working remotely, but also doing other things, exercising, cooking, reading, playing an instrument, whatever it is, that brings you joy. Managing expectations is another thing. So managing your own expectations as an individual, managing your expectations about what your group can do, your team, and your organization over a specific period of time, but over the crisis in particular. And practicing compassion, which is, as we've discussed before, around empathy, is about active listening, is about listening without judgment, especially when people disclose issues or concerns around their mental health, but also practicing self-compassion as well is really important, and something that not everybody does or everybody does well. And then maybe finally, I wanted to mention finding meaning in other areas aside from work. So if we think about ourselves and we think about our identities and who we are and what we represent, are we just about work, or are we also about other things as well? And there's some really interesting research that I came across a few years ago around passion and different types of passion, so harmonious versus obsessive passion. So whether or not we're speaking about work or other activities we like to engage in, when we're harmoniously passionate about something, it means we can integrate those activities into other areas of our life. It means we do those activities because they represent what we value and who we are. And it means we're in control of those activities. Those activities aren't in control of us. So we can put our work aside if it's about work when we need to. And we can engage in other things, and it doesn't create an internal sense of conflict, and we can see our friends and we can do other things, and it can lead to positive emotions and also psychological well-being. Whereas when we're more obsessively passionate about an activity, a hobby, or about our work, it means we're not in control. It means that activity is controlling us, and we're working and we're doing things because it's more about our egos, and it's more about social approval and other ways of validating our identities. And it's not necessarily aligned with who we are and other aspects of our lives. And it can create internal conflict in our relationships. And when we're not doing those activities, when we're not working, we feel compulsive about it, and we feel irritated about it and angry, and we experience negative emotions. And over a period of time, this can lead to declining mental health, so depression, anxiety, burnout, and so on. So I think it's really important. That's another thing that people can consider. We might need to reimagine our relationship to work and other aspects of our lives, and ask ourselves, do we define ourselves by criteria other than work? And I say this for myself as well. And when I've spoken about this before with my students, I sort of recognize myself in some of these descriptions. So do we define ourselves by any criteria other than work? Do we have a positive self-image of ourselves? Are we able to stop the activity in question or our work when we want to, when we need to? Or is there always that voice in the back of our head saying, we must do this, we need to do this, and we won't feel satisfied until we do that? But it's never enough, really. And also, when we are working, do we get into a state of flow? So it's not about feeling happy and enthused at every moment of the day when we're working. It's not about that. But does time pass quickly when we're engaged in work, when we're focusing on a particular task? So again, it's about reimagining, rethinking our relationship to work. So Ben, I don't know if you have any comments on that in particular, or any of the other issues I've raised, but otherwise I do have some final questions for you.
I think it's what you just said is really fascinating. And you said as you read it, speak about it, you recognize it. Likewise, I was sort of recognizing some of those traits, and it just really sort of an observation for business leaders is, it's actually any professional, it's a brave thing to objectively look at your behavior, and it's to be encouraged. And to sort of one of the things that really helped me in this crisis was, again, when we spoke right at the beginning, Rachel, and you said, Ben, yeah, we've got a crisis, but it's not like this is the first crisis the world's ever had. It's not the first pandemic the world's ever had. Do you want me to tell you about what's happened before to sort of help you realize what you're likely to go through? And that was great for the business. We started these webinars was to say, actually, objectively, you can step out and look at what's happened before and look at other businesses and learn from it and help you strategize. And I think it's the same for individuals. We need to take that advice ourselves and actually step back and look at the wealth of data, research that's been done about behavioral types and how destructive they can be, and how to manage them and how to look after yourself. I think just one last observation. I feel like as we've been talking today, I've really felt like a common thread with the webinars we did on sustainability and resilience. And you sort of, begin to almost like form in my mind that like thinking about mental health should be part of the DNA of the business. In the same way your core values should be the DNA, and sustainability should be in the DNA, resilience should be in the DNA, awareness of mental health should be in the DNA. And then a lot of the other things we've talked about, like with empathy and with just general sort of behavior, that's almost like the soul of the organization. You know, the way that you act and the way you treat people, and sort of what you feel good looks like. And I just think like that's just something to remember about sort of mental health issues in the workplace, like really embed it in the DNA, and then really have like the soul for caring for people as they come and raise those issues with you.
I think that's really helpful. And we have a couple of questions, so I'll just turn to those now. So.
Good question. So I think halfway through the crisis, there was, I read an article, I think on LinkedIn, about and it was critical of business leaders who were sort of doing large posts about their own mental health, and it was almost like trying to get, it was like clickbait for leaders talking about mental health. So I think if it's authentic, absolutely. I think if it's not authentic and it's to sort of like try and I don't know, get people to be empathetic with you, or try and drive PR to your business. Yeah, I think people will see through that very, very quickly, and you're actually really damage an organization and damage your reputation with your team. But I think the leader will always set the tone in their behavior, sadly for good and bad. And, you know, I think a leader who can be open and very also honest about their own struggles, and not making it about them, but so that they're encouraging others to open up about it.
It gives us permission, doesn't it, to say it's okay, we can acknowledge these feelings as well and what we're going through. And maybe we do need more support, and maybe we do need to act on it.
And I think also to be aware of the fact that it's something that you're always working on. You're never finished. Like you have to keep working on it, reviewing it, changing it, and being alive to what's going on.
Okay, great. And I have another question. Do you think mental health and well-being strategies embedded within a company will be something that individuals will look for in a potential employer?
Oh, that is such an excellent question. You know, I think the answer is, the honest answer is, unless somebody has probably had a mental health crisis at work, they're probably not looking for it, but they should. And in fact, wouldn't it be wonderful if businesses really start to put like their views on sustainability, their views upon like how they impact community, their views on mental health at the fore of the interviewing process or the job posting process? You know, often it's industry driven, it's revenue driven, it's role driven, but actually, is there a happier marriage to have between employee and employer if you actually start with the deeper things that will form a lasting and correct bond in a relationship? I'm going to take that up with my people team after this, and just and actually look at it ourselves, and maybe even run an experiment next year as we recruit, to start with the things like the bonds that we want to create with people as opposed to what the job is, and see if we attract a different type of employee, or a different our employees are great, we don't need different types of employees, but you know, just to see what.
I think that's a great initiative, and I'm sure we'll see a lot of you know, if you start doing things like that, other companies following suit as well. And I know some bigger companies are I think Google, for instance, and others are paying more attention to this now as we speak. And we also received a comment from someone saying, thanks so much for covering this topic. It's so important during this time, and it's been really valuable hearing you talk about this, because it isn't acknowledged or supported in my workplace. I don't know if you have any comments about that, Ben.
I think I've got to be careful because I don't want to go on a rant right here. But one of the things I find really disingenuous about businesses are when they modify their logo to support certain causes, worthy causes. And I'm not being critical of all businesses, but then when at the core of the business, like sustainability, staff welfare isn't there, and Yeah, I think that employees increasingly have a right to ask these things. And I think ask is the right approach. And over a period of time, an ask should become a demand.
Why aren't we talking
And
about these things
that
ever?
was absolutely. And I think that that's like the advice I get. If you're in that workplace, begin with suggestion, take it to ask. If you're committed to that workplace, believe in it, at some point can become a demand. And we need employers and we need businesses to sort of be alive for it and not just throw it out in a PR campaign or on LinkedIn to sort of get clicks, to actually like really root it in the DNA of the business.
Thank you. And I'm aware of the time, but maybe one final question from me, and that is, Ben, what are your
and I guess it's from a personal reflection. About 2 years ago, we went through probably what was the biggest crisis in the business history. It was a very stressful time for me. And there was a 6-month period of time where when I look back on, I realized I actually lost the concept of time. And what I mean by that was that if I would see someone, they would say, Ben, like, we met 4 months ago about this. And to me, if it had been 4 months, 4 weeks, 4 days, I wouldn't have been able to tell the difference. And it was that I knew at that point that my head was clearly scrambled because of the length of the trauma, if you like, the business trauma that I'd gone through. And my nervousness is, I believe, 80% or more of people in the workplace, even if their jobs stay the same, even if they've got like a level of financial security, have had 6 months exposure, 6 months of crisis. And that does create a level of lasting damage. And so, you know, if we come back out in the spring and there's a vaccine, great, there's gonna be loads of like good news stories, but people won't quite be repaired then. The mental health aspect's gonna take longer. And like, yeah, that is a pressing concern because that's just another layer of challenge for a business and an organization. And it's not as easy as like fixing a project or moving some money from one place to another. It's much harder to get right.
So maybe building on that and what you said prior, it's not just about addressing the immediate mental health demands now, but it's also creating a roadmap for the future as well, and incorporating mental health into everything that you do in the organization going forward, to help people recover over a longer period of time, but also to encourage people to discuss these important issues in general.
Absolutely.
Thanks everyone for joining us, and goodbye from me. Thank you.
Bye from me as well.